two of the most frequent questions I've been asked over the last several months, or comments I've received over the last several months, was, what do I mean by transhumanism and why am I concerned about it? And secondly, am I too political in what I'm saying about life on planet Earth right now? So I picked out a reading that addresses this short reading, and I called it Homo Artificialis from the Horse's Mouths. And none of this is conspiracy stuff. This is all published material. It's available for anybody who chooses to go find it. They're not being private about this. They're not being secretive about this. They're being completely public about it. Klaus Schwab is the founder and chairman of the World Economic Forum, WEF for short, and is co-author of COVID-19, The Great Reset, which was published in July 2020. Schwab advocates for a worldwide digital ID system that would be required in order for people to get access to goods and services, and it would monitor people's online behavior, their purchases, and their biometrics. His World Economic Forum is also behind the Own Nothing vision for life in 2030. He has said, acute crisis contributes to boosting the power of the state. There is no reason it should be different with the COVID-19 pandemic. A recent World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland included Xi Jinping of the Chinese Communist Party, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, and the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Yuval Noah Harari, an advisor to Schwab and the World Economic Forum, was the top speaker at Davos. Yuval Noah Harari is an Israeli public intellectual, a historian, and a professor in the Department of History at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's the author of Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, and also of Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow. Now, I have read both of these books, and I was really impressed with him and his scholarship until I heard what he had to say recently at Davos. Here are some of Harari's remarks at Davos. I'm quoting him now directly. Humans are now hackable animals. The whole idea that humans have this, this soul or this spirit, or they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me, that's over. By hacking organisms, elites may gain power to re-engineer the future of life itself. In the past, many tyrants and governments wanted to do this, but soon, at least some corporations and governments will be able to systematically hack all the people. Science is replacing evolution by natural selection with evolution by intelligent design. Not the intelligent design of some God above the clouds, but our intelligent design. And my comment, lest you think this was a cautionary warning, it wasn't. It was enthusiastic encouragement. Words definitely not inspired by God. Today is the third Sunday of the month. It's my practice to do a recap of the previous two homilies where I take a theme for the month, speak to it for two homilies, and then in the third, do a recap and a Q&A. So that's what we'll do with God's help today. So 2 weeks ago, I started with this Sufi legend of a group of travelers who've been lost in the desert for months. They've left a place called Old Town, I'm calling it Old Town, and they're trying to get to a place called New Town. And they were told that if they went across the desert, they'd find a signpost with 4 fingers on it, and it would point out the direction to New Town. And they're traveling through the desert for months and months and months. They're completely lost and they're losing hope. And then up ahead, they see this signpost in the distance. And as they're rushing towards it, a dust storm knocks the signpost over. And now they've totally lost heart. They have no idea now how to get to New Town. Until an old man notices that the 4 fingers are still attached to the post, which has fallen over. So he says, put it back upright. Now look at the sign that says Old Town and point it back the way we've come. And now you can see where New Town lies. And my conclusion is from this story that the best chance you have of finding your future is to examine your past, but then transcend your past. You can't just stay there. I said to you that we are companions on the journey. We are not companions on the sofa, and we're not companions at the signpost. We're companions on the journey. And it's our journey to look at where we've come from, to see where we're at right now, and to figure out where we want to go in the future. And that was the plan when I created this mission document for COJ and for myself. So today I want to give a brief recap of the 2 homilies, and then Michael Choi is actually going to set up small group discussions over the next several weeks perhaps to examine in detail your own version of what this might look like. So what ground did I cover in the last 2 homilies? I do a quick recap of them. One of the questions I was asked by the community after the community meeting on February the 20th was, what has changed that we need a new mission statement? Why now? And so what do we need to change from, and to what do we need to change? They were the questions that were asked for me. So what are we changing from? What have we changed from? We've changed from a democracy with civil rights to tyranny and the abolition of human rights. And why? Because we were asleep at the wheel. As Jesus famously said, if the householder knew at what stage the thief was going to break in and steal, he wouldn't have gone to sleep. So what is our journey now? It is from the tyranny and the abolition of human rights that we're currently experiencing in our world back to democracy and human rights. That is the why of changing our mission statement at that stage. That was the first point I covered. And the why we need to do that, we need to do that for our kids and for our grandkids. And we need to do it because we all volunteered to create Christ consciousness on our planet. And certainly this does not look like Christ consciousness. The reading I just did for you, that is not Christ consciousness. So let me deal with that notion of transhumanism in a bit more detail. I've been asked about this term that I coined some time back, homo artificialis. And my belief system is that we're at a trifurcation point in human evolution. And there's a biological dimension to that, there's a sociological dimension to that, and there's a spiritual dimension to that. So I just read from you Yuval Noah Harari's vision of the future, where it'll be evolution by intelligent design, but not this mishegas of some deity in the sky who's responsible, but we ourselves, our science will create the future for us. And it'll enable and encourage tyrants to take total control and to make human beings hackable. Other people are on the same notion. So the bioengineering of robotic cyborgs, in which we are creating the Internet of Things, your refrigerator, your cell phone, your cooker. At this stage, they're all capable of spying on you and relaying data for surveillance states. And we are part of the Internet of Things. Eventually, our biometrics are being uploaded as the WF want. Even our biometrics, our heart rate, respiration rate, what we're putting into our body, our purchases, all this has been uploaded. So what's the sociological implications of that? It is the great reset by a group of extraordinarily hypocritical human beings who meet in Davos, Switzerland every year. And they talk about climate change and the need to cut back on our usage of fossil fuels. And all of these guys, hundreds of them, are flying in private jets to Davos every single year while they're lecturing to the rest of us about climate change. It's a social credit system which has already been introduced in China, where you will own nothing but be happy, in which there will be no human rights ever again, except you get permission occasionally from the ruling tyrants to go to school or to travel or to purchase goods. So this is what I mean by the sociological dimension of transhumanism. And the spiritual dimension, it is to suppress religion completely and therefore delete God from the equation. There literally is a battle for the soul of planet Earth. And the trifurcation point, as far as I'm concerned, is 3 groups. Homo sociopathicus, the cabal, the tyrants who will rule, and they're complete psychopaths interested in control of the masses. Secondly, Homo artificialis, the hackable, programmable human cyborgs. And thirdly, Homo spiritualis, those people who are awake, and are talking up and being prophetically trying to wake up the rest of us. So that's what I mean by the trifurcation and human transhumanism. I dealt with that 2 Sundays ago. Some of the feedback I got was that the purpose of a community is to affirm people's faith. And I talked about a story of when I was still working in the parish in Palo Alto, saying Mass in St. Anne's one day, And after Mass, this very irate woman came up to me and she said, I come to church in order to have my faith confirmed, not to have it challenged. And my response to her was, well, then one of us is in the wrong church. And obviously I was the guy in the wrong church. And so we had to break from the Roman Catholic Church in order to create our own spirituality. And if we hadn't challenged the existing scenario, we'd still be parroting the Baltimore Catechism instead of every individual in the community being responsible for developing their own personal informed cosmology. We'd still be ruled by a clericalism which had control of the finances and the government of the parish, rather than being a self-governing group of people where the priest has nothing got to do whatsoever with the finances of the system. We'd still be performing liturgies where we're beating our breast and saying, have mercy on me, a sinner, Lord, I am not worthy, instead of a Eucharistic prayer of the cosmos. We'd still be fearful that little babies who died before they were baptized would end up for all eternity in limbo, where they would never see the face of God, or that we'd go to purgatory to be tortured for 1,000 years before we are allowed to go into heaven. We'd still be believing that we could go to hell for all eternity for missing Mass on a Sunday or for eating meat on a Friday. We'd still be refusing communion to non-Catholics at our liturgies, and there would be no women priests in COJ. That is what would have happened if we hadn't challenged the existing system. So that's what I mean by the purpose of community is twofold. It is to support us in our search and to challenge us in our belief systems. It needs to do both, not just one of them. I talked about how we create a vision for ourselves and for our community. And I see my function as a spiritual director for Companions on the Journey. It is to create a vision for the community, my vision for the community. You've got your own vision, but I have to create my vision as the spiritual director for the group. I have to try to develop a mystical theology that's going to allow us to soar. I have to try to develop and lead liturgies that nourish the heart. And I have to try to stretch the members beyond their comfort level. Otherwise, I'm not any kind of a spiritual leader. And an example of this was the Eucharistic Prayer of the Cosmos, which I wrote in 2007 on the 10th anniversary of COJ, and as a result of people complaining that there was a huge discrepancy between the liturgy we were celebrating every Sunday with, Lord, I am not worthy, and the theology I was preaching. And so I listened to that and I created a totally different liturgy, Eucharistic prayer. And the reaction spanned an entire spectrum. Some people said, yeah, it's really cute, but we can do it occasionally. Other people said, we hate it, get rid of it already. And there was a whole group of people who boycotted every Sunday at the end of the homily. They would leave the church, spend the next 40 minutes outside while I celebrated and the rest of us celebrated the Eucharistic Prayer of the Cosmos, and then join us downstairs for tea and cookies. So I'm getting the same kind of reaction at this stage to the mission statement. For me, it's a new vision for COJ because we're in a new era. It's a new vision for the United States of America because we're in a new system. And it's a new vision for Gaia, for the planet itself. And I'm getting some of the same reactions on a spectrum from excitement and enthusiasm to anger and to boycott. And that's how it is. I'm up for it. At age 75, I have now begun my last lap in this incarnation. And the first Sunday of June, I will be celebrating my 50th anniversary of ordination as a Roman Catholic priest. And we'll be celebrating on the 1st of June this year, our 25th anniversary from the founding of COJ. Now, given that I'm on the last lap of my life, I need to find the ideal outlet for the rest of my life for my priestly ministry. And I'm hoping it'll be as part of COJ. But if it transpires that the best use of my time and my talent in the future lies elsewhere, I'll go elsewhere in order to do that. So I need to know that there are people who are committed to their own personal visions of change and not staying stuck at the signpost or sitting on the sofa. Last Sunday, I picked up on the notion of the difference between ideals and values, between a vision and a personal cosmology. And I did a reading from a book that I co-authored in 2013 with Ralph Metzner and Matthew McKay. And I took a chapter from that book, chapter 9, which talked about the difference between values and ideals. Ideals are how we would be performing if we were at our best. Values are the compromises we make with the situation. And I use the image of driving your car. It's that your hands on the wheel, the movements of your hand on the wheel, that determine where you're actually going to arrive. So you can have a stated destination, and that would be your ideals. And then there's, a kind of a programmed destination, which is where you really actually want to go, the compromises you make with life. And every single one of us needs to wrestle with that. And if you want to know what your mission is in lifetime, I don't care who you are, where you are, what stage of life you are. If you want a simple one-line explanation of what your unique mission is, your mission is to identify what your ideals are and identify what your values are, and then shrink the gap between the two. So your function is to produce your own mission statement, maybe using what I've done as a kind of a jumping off point or a template in order to forge your own unique personal cosmology. And I've emphasized the personal cosmology again and again and again over the 25 years we've been together. I've written about it in several books. I have a whole section of my website dedicated to creating your own personal cosmology. Now, your own personal cosmology has to be unique. It has to be able to make sense of your unique life experiences. There has never been another human being who's had the same experiences that you've had. So your cosmology must be able to make sense of all those experiences. But it needs to be constantly updated because you're meeting new circumstances and you yourself are changing. Moreover, it has to make your heart sing. If it drags you down and makes you fearful and anxious, it is not a good cosmology. And finally, it has to stretch you beyond your mere role self, stretch you into what I call your soul self. I spoke about that last week. And then I addressed the question, which is a kind of, I've been hearing this for many, many months now, that I am far too political. So I differentiated between being political and being involved with partisan party politics. They're totally different. And I told you the story of the last few years of my life in Kenya. I was in Kenya from 1972 to 1986. And in 84, 85, I was living on the edge of the desert, the Baringo Desert, and I was subject to regular famines. And I was bringing food in, 3 lorry loads of food every month, distributing it to 19 villages in the area, only to find out that a local politician, he was an assistant minister in the government, was using government troops to steal the food from his own people, and he was selling it. And he and I clashed furiously at public meetings over several months. And then I came across a situation where this great notion of Harambee, which means self-help, which was a system where people would contribute to any worthwhile project, even in other parts of the country, only to find out that people were being whipped with a kiboko. A kiboko is the Swahili word for hippopotamus, and they make special whips out of hippopotamus hide, and people will be literally whipped into subjugation and forced to contribute a cow or a goat or a chicken or whatever. And I told you about an incident where I had to liberate 30 people. Soldiers had guns pointed at them, and the chief had a kiboko. And I confronted them what they were doing, got all the guys into the back of my pickup and drove them home. Well, I didn't tell you the rest of that story the last time. The end of that story was that I was summoned to a meeting of the District Security Council, the district commissioner, the chief of police, the special branch, and the chiefs of the area. And I was given 48 hours to leave the district. The district would be the equivalent of like a county. Like I was told I had to leave Sonoma County. Now, I refused to go. I told him if feeding the poor, and speaking up for freedom, if that's wrong, then, you try and arrest Jesus as well. I'm going back to my mission. You want to get me? Come and get me. So in the meantime, I had made a record of all of these complaints that the people of the villages were telling me. I wrote it all down. I got them to put their thumbprints on it if they couldn't write. And I sent all that material to the bishop, Raphael S. Ndingi Mwanawa Nzeki, who was based in Nakuru, an extraordinary man. So I managed to get a phone call in, the Bishop Ndingi, and I told him what happened, that I was given 48 hours quit notice. So he contacted the provincial commissioner, that would be like the governor of California. And he said, I have all this material. If this man is thrown out, I will publish all this material in the local press. And if not in the local press, I'll publish it internationally. So the PC obviously got onto the DC and told him back off. And so I survived. But I had to, every 3 years I'd come home on vacation to Ireland, and I had to get a work permit to go back to Kenya. So I knew I'd never get back there. They would never issue me a work permit again. So I left Kenya on the 20th of May, in 1986, probably the saddest day of my life. I spent the next year living in a big, dirty, unfriendly city called London. And then in 1987, on the 23rd of June, at 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon, I arrived on a Pan Am flight to the United States of America. And at that stage, I began to see that is the necessity and that is the price of being political if you're a spiritual leader. Now, the same thing is true of COJ. There's a level of politics which is important, which is actually a sine qua non. Because there's a very big difference between being political and being involved in partisan party politics. They're radically different. Politics, my definition of politics is that politics is the art of community self-government, whether that community is a family, or COJ, or the United States of America, or planet Earth. So politics is how a community self-governs, and everybody has to get involved with that process. That's very, very different from partisan party politics, where I identify with a particular party or particular leaders or my voting history. And so I've got personal heroes who are very political. Jesus Christ, the Buddha, Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi. They were political in the sense of spirituality in action, but never in the sense of partisan party propaganda. So I make no excuses for being political in that sense. We became very political as a community way back in 2011, when I gave a homily on how our world really works. And over the next 18 months, I delivered 18 lectures on different aspects of life on planet Earth, everything from agriculture to education, to finances, to the military-industrial complex, to religion, to politics, all of these areas we covered. And we created study groups that met every single week to research and go deeper into these. And my final comment was that spiritual leaders who attempt to be apolitical very soon become irrelevant, because they can't help those who have to live in the trenches created by the politics of everyday life. That's what I had to say about politics. And finally, I was asked, where in your document does it mention love or kindness or the feminine face of God? And here was my response to it. Firstly, it was a single-page document, not a 400-page theological treatise. And it has to be unpacked as you would unpack a parable of Jesus. It's full of love and kindness and the feminine face of God. And I pointed out a few areas. I spoke in the very first paragraph of that document about Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness is love personified. I can't think of any better articulation of what love looks like in a person than to create Christ consciousness in our times. I was asked, where is there kindness in this document? And my response is, freedom and human rights and concern for the oppressed, that is kindness in action. Not just kindness as words, but kindness in action, standing up for the oppressed. And I was asked, where was the feminine face of God in this document? And I pointed out that I advocated in paragraph 1 that people should spend time in nature. Nature is the quintessential feminine face of God. It is nature that literally builds our bodies molecule by molecule, in the same way that a mother builds a baby molecule by molecule inside her own body. Nature, is the feminine face of God, incarnate. She feeds us from her own body. Everything we put into our mouths has been gifted us by Mother Nature. She is the feminine face of God in spades. All of the clothes we wear and every house we live in has been built from things that Mother Nature gave us. She is definitely the feminine face of God. And I advocated Eucharist. And I have said to you many, many times that I can't think of a more feminine symbol of all of the symbols that Christ could have given us in the last 24 hours of his life. He chose the symbol of feeding us from his own body and blood. Symbolically, he created the chalice and the bread and said, he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has life everlasting, and I will raise him up in the last day. The last day is not when the angel blows the trumpet. The last day is when you wake up from being asleep and realize that Eucharist is the feminine face of God. It is God feeding us from our own body and from our own blood. And finally then, our mission, I believe, as a community, my mission as an individual, your mission as an individual, and the mission of all the souls who volunteered for incarnation is to release our divine nature in order that it may shine through our incarnated space suits. That is our sole purpose. And I'm punning, soul as in S-O-U-L, purpose, and soul as in S-O-L-E, purpose. That is the only reason we're on planet Earth. It is to demonstrate, and incarnate the feminine face of God. Namaste, my brothers and sisters. So let's open it up now to Q&A.
Father Seán, I just want to express to you how important it is for me to hear what you share with the community. You don't need a pat on the back from anybody, but I really appreciate your courage for speaking up on an issue that has been divisive in probably the whole world, in every family, in every human mind. I think that this split lives in each one of us. It lives in me, and it's been very difficult for me to face the decisions that I've had to take about friendship and community, and I guess that's my first just comment about your stance, because independently of where we fall, we may fall in one in agreeing with your opinion or not agreeing with it. It's just really important to ask those questions for ourselves, because they are coming from everywhere around us, and so I just to me it's very important to you as a leader, as a spiritual leader, are embodying a mission that clearly is about expressing your truth, and the way in which you're doing it here with your community is very important for me. So that, having said that, I just want to ask you a question about this idea of being true to our mission and to staying connected within the present. I feel that the challenge that the everything is presenting to us has to do with memories that come to our awareness, and suddenly you can, with everything, I've been trying to ask myself if what I'm experiencing is a memory, or if it's the present, and trying to exercise discernment there, and then the other factor of this is like expectations. Between memories and expectations, I think that most of our mind, or what configures in our interface with the world, it gets distracted between those two, and being able to discern if it's a memory or an expectation, then you can probably, and dismissing them obviously, then you can probably end up with something that is the moment and what the moment is presenting you, if we can face that. So I don't know if you can speak to that. I appreciate anything you have to say.
Sure. So you've wrapped three very important ideas into that one thing, Germán. And the first one is, the importance of having a personal vision or personal cosmology. And as I say, I've advocated this from the very, very beginning. Every single one of us has to create their own personal cosmology. What I did was to create mine and offer it as an example, but everybody has to create their own. But as I said last Sunday as well, it has to be based, your personal cosmology has to be based, it has to be an informed cosmology. It can't be just something you want to do or you think you should be doing. In the same way, in Catholic theology, the single most important arbiter of rightness is a person's own conscience. It is higher than the magisterium. It is higher than the Pope himself. Your own conscience is superior to everything else. With this proviso, that it's an informed conscience. If you're a Nazi soldier, taking people to the slaughter and killing them, and your conscience tells you it's the right thing to do because you're a soldier and you need to be obedient, it's not an informed conscience. And so the fact that, that your conscience tells you something doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing. So there's a lot of research that needs to go in. As you create your personal cosmology, you have to really research the issues. And that means you have to ferret out sources that have been censored, perspectives that have been deplatformed, in order to get a total understanding of what the reality is. So that's the first thing about the personal cosmology. The second thing you asked then was about memory. Are these memories or are they expectations? I did a series 2 or 3 months ago on the illusion of time, showing that time is an artifact of a particular state of consciousness, and showing to you, for instance, that in the dream state, there is no lag between mentation and manifestation. In physical awakening, you know, when you have an idea, it may take you 5 minutes to manifest it. Like, I'd like to make a sandwich. So you have that idea. It's going to take you 5 minutes to get to the fridge, get some bread and butter and some salami and create a sandwich. If your intention, you know, is to create, you know, build a skyscraper, it's going to take you several years between the mentation and the manifestation. In the dream state, they're instantaneous. The moment you think of something, you manifest it. And so in different states of consciousness, the time lag between the thought and the actualization of the thought is shrunk down to zero. Now, so timelines are different in different states of consciousness. Now, sometimes those other timelines break through. There's a multiplicity of universes out there. Yeah. And so what we do is we're selecting out particular timelines by the attention we give to it. In the same way that when Michelangelo is faced with a block of Carrara marble and he looks at this, you know, cube of marble, is he going to bring a Moses out of it? Is he going to bring a David out of it? Is he going to bring a Pieta out of it? Because they're all present there. It's only a question of taking away the stuff which is kind of unnecessary. So the truth is, you know, what timeline are you going to bring into your consciousness? Because there are a multiplicity of possible timelines out there. So sometimes what looks like a memory is just the fact that you've engaged in another timeline. It's actually a different version of choices that you could make at this moment. So that leads then into the notion of expectation. Is it your expectation that creates your reality? Your expectation actually is your ability to try to select out the timeline or the kind of outcome of your choice. Now, the only problem is you're part of 8 billion people on planet Earth. And there's a branch of mathematics called vector analysis. A vector is a commodity that has both quantity and direction. And so, for instance, speed is not a vector. Speed is 40 miles an hour. But velocity is a vector. Velocity is 40 miles an hour in a northwest direction. And so if you have any quantity that can be vectorized, where you can create a magnitude, you know, and a speed or a direction, you can estimate the final outcome. So if you have a rock with 8 billion ropes attached to it, and the rock is planet Earth or the future, and the 8 billion people are people with ropes, and you see how much pressure each individual is exercising in what direction, using vector analysis, you can predict precisely what direction the rock is going to move in at what speed. So your expectation is the rope on which you're pulling. Now, very, very often, we actually group, there's not 8 billion different ropes. There are maybe 100 different ropes, and we're all behind one of them: capitalism or communism or Catholicism or whatever it is. So there's a whole bunch of people pulling on one rope. And when you sum it up, you can see actually what way it's going to go. Now, the only difference is this: love totally, you know, overweights the equation. So anybody who's pulling with real love and compassion, their efforts are logarithmically more important and more powerful than those who are operating out of fear and anger. And so it may well be that a light being like a Jesus Christ pulling on a single rope can outweigh the pressure, you know, included by a million people pulling in the darkness. So your expectations have to be expectations of light. And the final thing I would say is you have to realize that change and evolution will happen in God's time and in God's way. I can't impose my egoic timeline or my egoic methodology. It has to happen in my lifetime and has to happen in this particular fashion. So the expectation has to be in full alignment with the divine purpose. So that's a long-winded answer to 3 great questions.
I've developed a cosmology over my 90 years, Seán, and I'd like to share a little bit of it, if I may, because I can get your comments. And my cosmology started out, of course, with before Catholicism, and then I was a Catholic, and then I became other things and so on. But all these have developed, increased my evaluation of what the universe is all about. And I think the concept that God has been anthropomorphized, or that is made much more human, is very necessary. We call God Father and Mother and Spirit and everything else. But God is much more than that. And those features are things we have to use to help our human nature. But God is really everything. He's part of all creation, every atom, every quark in the atoms, every molecule in our body is part of God. And therefore, God is in each one of us.
Yes.
And we call that the Christ consciousness, if we want to. Christ consciousness is within every one of us. The love is in every person and every piece of nature, of course, as well. But we do not always recognize that, and therefore part of our job in this world is to bring forth the Christ consciousness that's already within us, and that's part of, I feel, my personal job. Bring forth the love that's in it, to have that represent all people, and have compassion and empathy for other people because of the Christ within them, the Christ consciousness within them, and encourage them to do the same thing.
Right.
And that's a very simplified version. I'm not as verbal as you are, Seán, to carry this forward to a long thesis, but I'd like you to comment on what I've just said.
I agree 100% of what you said, Bob. It's a beautiful articulation of it. And I kind of move it forward a little bit. I totally agree with you that Christ consciousness is the core of everything. And so I distinguish between three levels of self. There's the role self, which is the kind of the character I'm playing in this particular incarnation as Seán. And then there's the soul self, which is the kind of the eternal fractal of God. And then there's the source self, which is God herself. Now, you rightly point out that we are anthropomorphizing God, but that we have to. And I've used this example before. I live in the middle of the forest. The forest is not a person, but I'm a person. And therefore, the only kind of relationship I can have with the forest is a personal relationship. And so even though God is radically ineffable and inarticulatable, I'm a human being. And therefore, the only kind of relationship I can have with God is a personal relationship. As long as I don't think that my kind of personal relationship defines God. I've used the example many times of, the difference between the ineffability of God and the kind of the immanence of God, the God that we can talk about and write about and speak about, is the difference between Shakespeare and his collected works. Shakespeare is much, much more than even his collected works. And so God is much, much more than her collected works at this stage. So we have to be really, really careful that when we anthropomorphize God, it's only so we can get a handle on our own relationship to that which is radically ineffable. But then we have to realize that in order to release the Christ consciousness in other people, we have to exercise 4 different kinds of compassion. There's compassion, which is confirmation. Attaboy, you're doing a great job. There's compassion, which is cooperation, being part of a team, trying to create a specific outcome. There's the compassion of compensation. Somebody drops the ball and I pick it up and help them along. And then there's compassion by confrontation. There are times when people are behaving in such a way that in order to release the Christ consciousness within them, you have to challenge them. You see a group of Nazis loading Jews onto cattle carts to take them to Auschwitz. And all of those Nazis have Christ consciousness locked inside them. But you're not going to clap and say, way to go, grand job. You have to confront what they're doing. So we have to be very, very careful that in order to elicit the Christ consciousness in other people, sometimes we have to challenge and confront their behavior. Right? But I love the way you've articulated your cosmology, Bob. Thank you.
I want to say first that, a lot of us are in that stage of our lives that you're in. We're in the last, so we're all trying to figure things out and make decisions. And we've been squeezed into this different reality by the pandemic and by so many things that are going on in the world. So you're not alone.
Right.
It's very hard, facing the things that we're facing in our families, in our home, on our planet. We're seeing war and devastation and inequities. And so most of us are heartbroken.
Yeah.
And seeing things changing and wondering what we can do and what we should do and what we can't do. So you're up on your mountain trying to figure it out. We're down here trying to figure it out. So, but my question is, and I really don't know how to put this into words very well, but how do you see COJ, we're basically right now a Zoom community, right? How do you see us differently than the way that we are now going forward in the future and taking action on your vision of the community? Do you see a difference in our actions going forward? Is it that in our community actions, not as our looking into ourselves and re-examining our cosmology, but as a community going forward, what difference do you see for us?
That's
I'm kind of confused.
That's a brilliant question, Johanna. Yeah. And so there are very, very many facets to what the future might look like. One of the most exciting to me is the fact that we have become truly an international community, maybe because of the COVID. And if I've contributed in any way to that, it is because I've done a whole bunch of interviews with fairly famous, interviewers, that have kind of managed to kind of gain purchase. We have Amy Dillon, in here this morning from Tasmania. We have Nikki from London. We've got Drew, from Canada. So we got a truly international community for the first time ever, bringing extraordinary kind of experiences and cultural, talent to community. So on one length, the very fact that we've had to kind of resort to Zoom has meant actually that the family has grown, and that we have additions which are bringing whole new insights and a whole new energy to our community. So that's one aspect of it. Obviously, person-to-person contact and hugging people is really, really important. So I foresee that, our larger Zoom community may result in a kind of physical meetings of smaller groups, perhaps, who get together on a regular basis, either on Sunday or other times, in order to kind of share their explorations and their personal cosmologies, and maybe even on occasions to get together in a bigger group. Now, I've just been thinking this myself in the last few days, and I don't know where it's going to go. But the 8th of June this year is actually the 25th anniversary of our first physical getting together in the SDA Church and our first celebration of a Eucharist as a community. And I don't like to travel anymore, but I'm more than willing, if we are to create some kind of a celebration for COJ in the SDA Church, I'd be more than happy to come and celebrate Eucharist for the community, physically present on that occasion. And then afterwards, little groups of the community need to decide what level of physical contact and what kinds of context they want, whether that's, a group in Canada or Australia, or England, or in Palo Alto. For me, wherever it is that people want to make physical contact with each other. So I see it like it's a two-pronged future. That's my answer to your question, John. It's a great question.
Thank you so much, Seán. And I would really look forward to a 25th celebration that would be made wonderful by you coming. Thank you so much for thinking about it. I hope it works out.
Thanks.
And I like the idea of, there's groups of us that could kind of live close and maybe get together and celebrate Mass with each other, even if it's not at the church or whatever.
Exactly.
People who are not comfortable. And yes. I've been thinking that for a long time, but it hasn't. I've made one or two suggestions, but it hasn't clicked yet.
Good.
But it's a great idea. Thank you. That helps because unification and action in our community is really important, more than ever right now. So thank you for that.
So one final word of inspiration to the initial kind of comment that you made, Johanna, about the times in which we live. I know as a psychologist, and you know as a human being, that some of the greatest critical parts of your life led to the greatest breakthroughs in your life. I know that for me, the toughest year of my life was a year I spent in London, but it led to coming to Palo Alto and meeting some extraordinary people who are still my best friends. I know that the planet herself and the cosmos itself does this. The cosmos is 13.8 billion years of age. The first series of stars, which are almost 12 billion years old, had to live out their lifespan and explode and go supernova in order to create the second generation of stars. Our sun is a second generation star. If the first stars hadn't gone supernova, there wouldn't be our solar system and there wouldn't be planet Earth. The same thing on planet Earth itself. Life began here 3.7 billion years ago with single-celled creatures. And these creatures learned to harvest, hydrogen, which is very, very plentiful in our universe. They learned to harvest it from sunlight. They learned to harvest it from rocks even. And then they finally learned how to harvest it from water. But water is H2O. When you extract hydrogen from water, you release oxygen. And oxygen was absolutely deadly to the first life forms on planet Earth. Deadly. So they were committing a murder-suicide every time they extracted hydrogen from water. They released oxygen and poisoned themselves. It took them 1.5 billion years to find a solution. And finally, they created the mitochondria, which is at the core of every cell of your body. And mitochondria, it's not only is it not killed by oxygen, it harvests oxygen and it turns it into energy for the entire body. So there is never a significant shift in consciousness which is not precipitated by some kind of a crisis. We're in a global crisis, but we're giving birth to something much better. But we have to hold that vision and we have to confront those who are trying to kind of slow down that process, those who are trying to eviscerate God from the equation and create just literally cyborg monsters. They have to be confronted as we release the energy of light at the same time.
It sounds like we're all kind of like touching on this idea right now, but I just want to emphasize, I was led back to a video from 2015, your talk titled, Does Prayer Really Work?
Okay.
And it outlines just like a layout that I have found very helpful. Just the elements that make prayer successful. And once again, I feel like you've kind of touched on a lot of that in this discussion already. But in addition to really, I would say kind of an optimistic way of looking at our present situation. I mean, I see it as very necessary to acknowledge the challenges that we face. So I appreciate you doing that and inspiring us to do the same thing. But is there anything else you can emphasize on acknowledging the opportunities in the situations that we face right now and how this layout for prayer can help us accomplish a more kind of benevolent outcome?
So two things I would say to that, Robbie. The first one is, that method of prayer, I think, is really important. That was my PhD dissertation, the effects of intercessory prayer at a distance on self-esteem, anxiety, and depression. And so what I found out is that in order for prayer to be effective, the first thing is I have to clean my own heart. If you come to my door looking for a cup of water and I offer you a cup of water in a very dirty jug, which is filled with bacteria, I may think I'm helping you, but I'm poisoning you. And so any intentionality that's coming from anger or fear or anxiety or hatred is going to poison the target at which I'm directing my prayer. So prayer has to come from a healed, holy heart. So that means, getting rid of any anger I have, getting rid of any kind of unforgiveness I have before I attempt to send an intention to any person or any situation. So cleaning my heart is the first thing. The next one then is a laserized intentionality, a real focused intentionality. The next piece is, walking the talk. There's a great Muslim proverb that says, pray to Allah, but first tie up your camel. If you ask Allah at night, look after my camel while I'm asleep, but you didn't tie up the camel is going to be gone in the morning. So you have to tie up your camel. So in other words, you have to do what you can do, kind of sociologically, and psychologically, and in relationships to kind of create that. And then we have to realize that we have to defer to God's timing and God's methodology. And the third thing I would say to you, Robbie, is that the more we realize, and this is my own crazy cosmology, I'm totally convinced that every single person on planet Earth volunteered to be here now. It's not a mistake that we found ourselves in this situation. It's not just accidental. It's not just that a sperm met an egg and bingo, there's another human being who didn't ask to be born. It is not that. Souls volunteer for incarnation in a specific time of human history. But 99% of us are asleep at the wheel. We don't know who God is. We don't know who I am. We don't know who my neighbor is, and we don't know what the mission is. So waking up to that realization that we're not here by mistake. We don't find ourselves in times for which we weren't actually spiritually prepared. So you're here because you volunteered. You parachuted in here, knowing precisely what you were coming into and knowing the gifts that you had and the contribution that you were going to make. So part of the cosmology is waking up to that realization. And I've said the core of any cosmology is 4 questions. And it's the skeleton around which you build your cosmology. And the first question is, who is God for me? Is God a distant, demanding deity? Is God a punitive, father figure in the sky? Or is God a benevolent grandmother, who dotes on all her grandchildren? Who is God for you? Secondly, when you say I, what do you mean by I? Are you talking about a skin-encapsulated ego? Are you talking about your spacesuit? Are you talking about your relationships? Are you talking about your emotions? Are you talking about the jobs you do? Or are you an eternal being? Is that who you are? Thirdly, who is my neighbor? Is my neighbor the person who just thinks as I think? The person with the same skin color as me? Or is my neighbor all sentient beings throughout the universe? And fourthly, what is my mission? What did I come down here to do? When you answer those 4 questions, you have the core of a personal cosmology. Now you have to flesh it out.
Father Seán, I just wanted to thank you for clarifying, for me to know how do I know if I am on the right track? And I know I am on the right track because you make my heart sing.
And Carmen Seta, you make a lot of other hearts sing. I've known you for a long time. You create joy all around you. So a million thanks to you.
Hello, Seán.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi. Take a moment of gratitude. I've been so elevated by these past few weeks, this level of spiritual leadership and the change, and just staying true to your soul purpose. I've heard some powerful things that are going to touch on this question I ask around, calling out these behaviors, calling out these things from a place of your light and making that your priority. But my question is really, can you describe some of what you see as the root causes of homopsychopathic and this negative ego? And how did this state of consciousness evolve and become so prevalent? And what is it that you see as the solution to healing from that level of separation consciousness?
So that's a huge, huge, huge question, Hannah. I've done an entire interview on that, and then there's 2 more interviews coming up in May down in Boulder addressing similar kinds of topics. So let me just a few quick hits at it. So we have to confront then what do we mean by the problem of evil. And so one model, I think I've included this in the book as well. One model of evil is that, we're born on a spectrum that goes all the way from service to self at one end. I call that A Street, over to service to other at the other end. I call that B Street. So every little human infant is born on A Street. Every little human infant has to be totally self-engrossed. They're going to need mother's milk. They're going to need cuddling. They're going to need security. So we're all born at the level of service to self. We're total narcissists at birth, and we need to be in order to actually survive infanthood. But throughout life, we need to move more and more across until finally we become more service to others. And the ultimate would be somebody like Mother Teresa, or Martin Luther King Jr., or Mahatma Gandhi, or the Buddha, or Jesus. And so our job is to move across that. And so a lot of evil comes from the fact that a lot of people are stuck at the service to self level. And unfortunately, a lot of these people find their way into positions of power. And as a psychologist, I've come to the conclusion that, about 1% of the population is actually born psychopathic, about 1%. But they're overrepresented in a few different areas. They're overrepresented in politics. They're overrepresented in the top echelons of church activities. They're overrepresented in the finance market. They're overrepresented in the military. And so you look at these groups, and it is not 1% psychopaths, it's much, much higher. So these are people who are kind of stuck at the service to self in the sense of wanting to get control. That's one model. A second model would be that there's a phenomenon called projection. Carl Jung talked about it. Projection is where, instead of identifying my own shadow material and working with it, I have to project it onto a screen in order to see it more clearly. Now, I've used this example many times. If you go to a theater, there's two ways of seeing a movie. You can go sit in the seats and watch the screen, and it's 40 feet by 30 feet, and you see these huge big images, and you get the illusion of motion and time, and change. Or you could go up into the projectionist box and take the reel and go through it frame by frame by frame, 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. You're seeing the same movie. It's a totally different experience. So in order to kind of see clearly what's in the tiny frames, you have to shine white light through it, project it on a screen. But if you think that the action is actually happening on the screen and you try to intervene by throwing stones at the bad guy, you're living in illusion. And so Jung said projection is only the first of a two-part system. You project onto another person in order to see clearly what's in your own heart. But then, having used them as a screen, you thank them for being a screen, and then you retroject it and say, I know it's my stuff, and therefore I am going to work on that. Now, when we project our shadow material onto another human being, we have interpersonal problems. When we do that as a community onto another community, we have prejudice. But when we do this as a human community and we project the unhealed human shadow of the entire species, we create literally a gigantic tulpa. A tulpa is it's a Buddhist word meaning a personified energy. So it could be thoughts can personify and take on their own energy and their own personality. It's like an example I've used, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is a bunch of garbage bigger than the state of Texas that's lodged between the west coast of America and the east coast of Asia. And because of the gyroscopic nature of the tides, it comes around into this big mass of garbage, bottles and cans and debris that are thrown into the ocean in the west coast of America and the east coast of Asia, and from ships at sea. Now, a tulpa is like that for the human community. As a human community, the unowned shadow material of the entire species is dumped. And it has energy, it constellates, and it interfaces with humanity and with nature herself. So that's a third reason for evil. And a fourth one, and I'm going to go way out on the limb at this stage, but it's my belief system. I'm quoting Paul's letter to the Ephesians, where he says, our battle is not with beings of earth, but with the powers in the heavens. That there are literally forces, either disincarnate entities or extraterrestrials of various kinds, or extra, dimensionals of any kind. But to think, for instance, that a universe of 13.8 billion years, in which planet Earth is only 4.6 billion years. So there are parts of the universe which are literally 3 times older than life on planet Earth, that there aren't beings there. And if there are, then those beings land somewhere on the same spectrum, service to self or service to other. And so it's a multifaceted equation. Now, the one thing I will say is this: it is not the intent. God did not build evil into the equation. And I've used the example of, there's a beautiful poem that reminded me of my grandfather, Daddy Jim. He was a consummate, a musician, and he played the fiddle in particular. And there's a beautiful poem called "The Touch of the Master's Hand." Have you ever come across that? It's somebody who is auctioning off the contents of their home, and so there's this big auction, and they're auctioning off, the sofa, and the beds and whatever. And then finally, there's one item left. It's an old battered violin. And the auctioneer holds it up and he says, what am I bid for this, piece of crap? $2, $3, $3 once, $3 twice. And all of a sudden, an old man comes from the back of the room and says, can you loan me the fiddle for a moment? And he goes up, he takes the fiddle, he tightens the strings, takes the bow, and he starts playing the most exotic music you've ever heard. And there's dead, mystical silence in the room. And the old man gives back the bow and the fiddle to the auctioneer and walks out of the room. And the auctioneer picks it back up again. He said, what am I bid for this fiddle? 2,000, 3,000, 3,000 going once, 3,000 going twice. And the people ask him, what was the difference? What happened? What changed from $2 to 2,000? And the auctioneer said, it was the touch of the master's hand. Now, God creates fiddles to create beautiful music, but in the hands of a neophyte who has no interest in music or no respect for it, it's going to create cacophony. Evil is the cacophony created when beings take God's instruments, which are all beings that live, and create cacophony as a result. So it's not built into the system. God did not create it. He did not create, the fiddle to create cacophony. He created it to create, harmony and symphony. And so when we think about the origins of evil, we have to take God out of the equation as if God meant it to be so. He did not mean it to be so.
First of all, I have to say, damn good answer to Carmen. The whole "you make a lot of other hearts sing," brilliant. I was trying to see if that related to me. I make a lot of hearts do things, but not singing. So I don't think it applies. Brilliant answer. This might be more an observation, and then you can comment. You talk about bifurcation or trifurcation, these forks in the road we come to, right? Like the big one we're at right now, Homo spiritualis, Homo robotic, whatever, right? And this transition from 3D to 5D that we're going into. Isn't it essentially at the end that we're just getting data and information so we can have contrast to make choices? The folks that want to stay with, as you say, companions on the couch, that's totally fine, cool, no problem, no judgment there. The folks that want to go on and become spiritualists, fine. Whatever you chose to volunteer for, and you came here and you choose to change your mind and you don't want that contract anymore, that agreement, that's totally fine, right? It's really about getting contrast and then choosing what is in alignment with what is vibrationally where you're at now, and what your level of consciousness is at is really no one else's business. It's like, that's your journey. You're going to look at your life review. Yeshua's going to stop eating popcorn or not, if that's who you think that's in the back of the review station. It's kind of an individual thing in many ways. And yes, there's a collective impact, but we've been through this rodeo many, many times before on Gaia. And no matter what humans choose to do, she's got her own damn plans, independent, apart from what humans choose, whether they want war, not war, nuclear war, no war, aliens visit. She's going to do what she's going to do. And that might not have anything to do with humans being on this planet in the current form of spacesuits that they're on. Right?
Great comments, Raven. So you're absolutely right. And so everybody has to make their own decisions based on their own best evidence. But I emphasize it has to be informed decision-making, informed cosmology. I can't just sit back. And so I'm not interested in doing any research or, looking at the issues whatsoever. I'm happy where I am, where I am right now. So there's a big difference then, I've said many times, between judgment and evaluation. Judgment is ascribing ontological value to a person or to an event, like that's an evil person, or that's an unhappy or an unfortunate event. That's judgment. Evaluation is very different. Evaluation is determining the appropriate response to a person or to an event. I don't have to pigeonhole them in order to choose an appropriate response. So I'm not going to just put them into a pigeonhole and say, this is a good person, this is a bad person. I'm going to say, that's kind of energy I don't want to be around. Here's my decision when I meet a particular kind of energy. I don't want to be there. And you're absolutely right. That is basically, vibration. The universe is energy. E equals mc squared. Ultimately, everything reduces down to energy. And energy has particular vibrational frequencies. And one kind of vibration will sound really cacophonous to the ear, and another vibration will sound really melodic to the ear. And it's the same thing about what causes actually physical manifestation is vibrations and frequencies of their various kinds. And so people are going to go to a vibratory level where they feel comfortable. It's soothing for them. Misery loves company. At the same time, spiritual people want to hang out with spiritual people. So I think I may have mentioned in December of 2012. I think I actually used this as a reading a few months ago. Occasionally, I'll have these encounters with astral entities, particularly when I go down to the creek, which is about a mile down the track from where I live. Having this encounter with, on the banks of the river was sitting this old man chewing on a blade of grass. And I sat beside him and I picked blade of grass and I'm chewing on my own. Now, this is an encounter that's happening not in physical reality, it's happening at some kind of an astral level. And I know he wanted to tell me something, but he hadn't spoken. So I said to him out loud, in my mind, I'm thinking, I wonder if he's going to tell me a story. And all of a sudden, the guy speaks loud and says, yes, I will tell you a story. And he told me this story, that he was a being from a totally different system, whose raison d'etre was to kind of create life all over the universe. And they would go to planets in various places, and they would seed these planets. And then they would kind of bring fertilizer from their own place, and they would genetically modify it, and they would water it, and they would weed it occasionally. And he said, I've done this in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of planets. And I can always kind of see what the trajectory is going to look like. Even when flora gives birth to fauna, I can pretty much predict what kind of fauna are going to emerge from the flora. But there comes a stage when a particular fauna develops self-awareness. And at that stage, all bets are off. I can never predict at that stage how they're going to use that self-knowledge and the technology that comes with it. You know, and I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times. And sometimes they've broken through into Christ consciousness, and sometimes they've created nuclear holocaust or destroyed their habitat. But I can never predict when they reach that bifurcation point, what route they're going to take. And that was 10 years ago right now. And that's what I see happening at this stage. You know, that intelligences are that have seeded life on planet Earth. And Francis Crick, the kind of the co-discoverer of the DNA molecule, said famously in an interview one time, it's directed panspermia, which means that life on planet Earth came from elsewhere. It was directed. And he was asked, you know, what do you mean directed panspermia? He said it came in a vehicle. So obviously some intelligence, you know, sent it here at some stage. So we know that life was seeded from elsewhere, which doesn't account, that's an infinite regression. Where did it come from on the original planet? So obviously at some stage you have to step outside of physical vibration into a different level of vibration that you might call God or source or whatever. But that's where we're at right now. There is no guarantee. And those who seeded us, you know, have no guarantee. They're not going to intervene and prevent the destruction. If we need to blow it up and destroy ourselves, they'll simply start again. I said to you a few weeks ago that even the very first word in the Bible, in Hebrew, Breshit. Breshit is always translated as in the beginning. It does not mean in the beginning. If they wanted to say in the beginning, they would have said Bareshit. They didn't. It's written Breshit, which means in a beginning, which means this may have happened again and again and again. So many different mythologies have a cyclical notion of time, that we've been in this place before. The myth of Atlantis, the myth of Lemuria. In Celtic mythology, we talk about a place called, there's two names. Sometimes we call it Tír na nÓg, which means the land of the ever young. And sometimes we call it Tír Fáthán, which means the land under the waves. And there's a whole bunch of great Irish mythology about the land under the waves. So that represent a previous civilization, you know, that either went underground by design or was forced to go underground by some kind of catastrophe.
Yeah, last thing, Father Seán, to that. So really, we're at the place of escape velocity then, right?
Yes.
We're going to either break gravity or we're going to go right back and have a Challenger experience, right?
Yes.
We're
Right.
really at that place. I mean,
Right.
we're probably within years or decades at the most for us old people on the call, right?
And
Within
the
our
good news is-
lifetime.
The good news and the bad news is that it's not going to be the end of Gaia. Gaia will just shake it off. You know, 245 million years ago, during the Permian extinction, 90% of all marine life was destroyed, and 85% of all land life was destroyed. And then when you look at the fossil record, there was this extraordinary burgeoning of new life forms that hadn't been previously seen. And so Gaia will shake it off and get on with the task of creating a species which eventually will be so aware of its own divinity that they will be aware of the divinity of nature herself. And then there'll be a breakthrough into a heaven on earth.
I like the idea of trying to put together our own personal cosmologies. I don't know the Bible very well because I didn't grow up reading it, but I'm having an idea, like just with how I'm creating my own personal cosmology, that a lot of it does have to do with understanding the certain kind of gifts and interests that we have here, and then nurturing them and developing them. And so I guess one of my questions is I know there's some story in the Bible about three kids who get some gift from their dad and one does nothing with it. And then what is that one? Because I actually want to find it somewhere and review it. Do you know it when I'm talking
Yes,
about?
I do. It's called the parable of the talents.
The talents.
They were actually grown-up kids. It was Jesus telling them. He said, a certain man, called in his workers, and he gave one guy 5 talents, another guy 2 talents, another one 1 talent, and then he went away on a journey and came back after a few years later. He says, "What did you do with the money I gave you?" And the first guy says, "You gave me 5 talents. I invested in it. I made a farm out of it. And I have 5 more talents. Here, 10 talents back to you." And the master says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Because you've been faithful over a few things, come into my kingdom, and I'll put you in charge of many things." And then he calls in the guy who had the 2 talents. And this guy says, "You give me 2 talents, and I really, really worked hard. I made 2 more talents. So here's the 4 talents." And Christ says, "Well done, good, faithful servant. Come in here. I'm going to put you in charge of a whole bunch of stuff." And then he calls in the guy who got 1. And this guy said, "Well, I know you're a really tough dude, and I know I couldn't shape up. And so I went and I hid my talent in the ground, and when I knew you were coming back, I dug it up. Here it is." And I won't tell you what Jesus said. He used the 4-letter words. So what are the talents? So to get back to it then, I believe, Lynn, that when we incarnate, we come bearing 2 kinds of gifts. Every single soul comes in with 2 kinds of gifts. And the first kind of gifts are our talents. We're particularly good at some arena. But these talents do not belong to us. We're like a mailman with a bunch of letters. The fact that the letters are in my mailbag doesn't mean that the letters belong to me. They mean that I'm supposed to deliver them to the people whose names are on the envelopes. So my job as the mailman is to deliver the letters. My talents are the envelopes in the mailbag. They're meant for the world. Now, I can make a living out of it, like the mailman does, but I'm not allowed to make a killing out of it, or not to feel like they're mine and hog them. The second kind of gifts we come with are our problems. Every single one of us is going to come into life to work on 2 or 3 issues. It might be compassion, it could be courage, it could be patience, it could be forgiveness, or whatever it is. And most of us, we project those onto others and we accuse them, of being the problem. He's a really, really angry person, or she's an unforgiving person, or whatever. So we project the stuff that was meant for ourselves, and we hog the stuff that was meant for others. So we come with those 2 kinds of gifts. So part of the mission, as I move from my values to my ideals, is to identify what are my talents and how do I utilize them for the benefit of other people, and what are the difficulties I'm wrestling with, because they are the guarantee that I'm going to have to stretch and grow. So instead of projecting them, I have to own them and work with them.
Can I ask one more question? Thank you for that. That was excellent. So then, if the idea is to move from being less self-centered, because one of the ways I identify maybe some particular talents I personally have to share are, those things where you feel in the groove and you so enjoy doing them, like time stands still. Is that considered too selfish to some people? Oh, well, I'm going to nurture what I love to do because it's one of those talents that's meant to be shared with people. I think just over the past couple of years, we're hearing a lot of messages about, you do these things for the good of other people. So I'm just wondering, how do you, it might seem selfish to some to be focused on your own development so you can give out. I don't know if I'm really asking that question correctly. You know what I mean?
You're asking a very important question then. And the truth is then, how do I become a better vehicle to transmit and to channel that which I've come, to gift to the world? Mm-hmm. And so if I'm trying to deliver, clean water through a dirty pipe system, myself, I'm going to poison the consumer. And so it becomes really important that the pipe system, the channel I am, is the best possible channel, so that the consumer is getting really high class water. So develop it. The only caveat, obviously, is that the ego always loves to hijack an enterprising kind of effort. So we have to be really, really sure that the ego doesn't hijack the spiritual quest as well. The ego is very important. You can't operate in incarnation without an ego. It's a very good servant, but it's a terrible master. So I have to make sure that I'm not fooling myself. I'm not pretending just to become a better channel so as to gain glory, but I'm actually hogging the water and I'm not letting the water flow to the individuals for whom it was intended.